She looked at me with
Egal
that
wen
sly
du lette.
smile and said, "Men my age bore me." Then she leaned closer, her voice low, almost daring me. "But you excite me." I didn't know it then, but those words would change everything. I wasn't looking for anyone that night. Honestly, I just wanted a quiet place to sit with my thoughts, maybe a drink, maybe a book. The city can feel so loud sometimes, like it's pulling you in every direction, and I needed somewhere to breathe. That's how I ended up in a little wine bar tucked away down a side street, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Inside, the lights were soft and golden, the air faintly touched with oak and something sweet like cinnamon. It was quiet enough that you could hear the low murmur of conversation, but not so quiet that silence felt heavy. A safe space for strangers. And then I saw her. She sat alone, a glass of red wine in her hand, a book open in front of her. Most people who sit alone in bars look restless, checking their phones, waiting for something to happen. But not her. She was perfectly at ease, as if solitude was an old friend. There was something about that confidence, that calmness, that drew my eyes before I realized what I was doing. She looked graceful, not the forced kind of beauty you see on magazine covers, but the kind that belongs to someone who's lived enough life to know herself. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, a touch of silver glinting under the light. Her posture was relaxed, her lips curved just slightly, like she was amused by something only she knew. I told myself not to stare, and yet, when she lifted her head, her eyes met mine across the room. It wasn't an accident. She didn't look away quickly, the way people usually do when they're caught glancing. No, her gaze held mine, steady, curious, almost challenging, like she was asking a question without saying a word. That moment stretched longer than it should have. The room didn't go silent, but everything else faded a little. The clink of glasses, the hum of voices, the soft notes of music from the speaker. All I was aware of was her eyes on mine. I looked down at my drink, pretending I wasn't affected, but the truth is, I was. My pulse had quickened, not in a panicked way, but in the way it does when you stumble into something unexpected. Something you know matters. When I glanced back up, she was still watching me. This time, there was the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. Not wide, not obvious. Just a hint, as if she'd already figured me out, as if she knew exactly what I was thinking. I should have looked away. I should have gone back to my drink and let it pass as nothing more than a moment. But instead, I found myself holding her gaze again. And in that quiet exchange, no words, no movement, I felt it. That strange pull, subtle but undeniable. Something told me this wasn't the kind of night I had expected. I didn't plan on talking to her. In fact, I convinced myself it was safer not to. But fate, or maybe just the lack of empty tables, had other ideas. When the waiter glanced toward the chair at the small table beside hers, she noticed. She gave a tiny shrug, a lift of her hand that said, "Go on, sit." So I did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I ordered a drink, tried to act casual, but the presence of her so close, no longer across the room, but within arm's reach, shifted the air around me. The scent of her perfume was subtle, something floral with a faint warmth I couldn't place. My eyes caught the cover of the book resting open in front of her. "That's a heavy choice for a night out," I said, my voice lighter than I felt. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, not quite teasing. Better company than most men I meet in places like this. I chuckled, caught off guard by her frankness. I hoped it wasn't aimed at me. Her eyes lifted, steady, unhurried. "Not yet," she said. Then she leaned in slightly, as though testing the edge of the conversation, and asked, "What about you? Do you always sit alone in bars and make small talk about books?" "Only when the reader looks like they might actually have something interesting to say," I replied. That made her smile, small but real this time. The lines at the corners of her eyes softened, not aged, but deepened by laughter and years of living. We talked, at first about the book, then about travel, about the city, about nothing and everything. She had this way of speaking, sharp when she wanted to be, but always with an undertone of thoughtfulness. She wasn't trying to impress me, and that alone made her fascinating. At some point, She set her wine glass down and studied me, her head tilted just slightly. How old are you? The question landed like a quiet arrow. 25, I admitted, half expecting the conversation to shift to cool. But she only hummed, as if turning the answer over in her mind. Then, with a smirk that was both playful and disarming, she said, Men my age bore me. The words hung in the air between us. I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out more nervous than I wanted. Is that right? She didn't break eye contact. Instead, her voice dropped lower, softer, almost like a secret being shared. But you excite me. And just like that, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't that the room fell away, though in some sense it did. It was that everything sharpened, the closeness of her arm beside mine, the warmth of her hand when it brushed lightly against my wrist to emphasize a point, the faint electricity that followed in its wake. I told myself not to read too much into it, but the truth was I already had. Her words, her tone, the way her eyes lingered, it wasn't a game. It was an invitation, and I had no idea where it might lead. We met again a few days later. This time, it wasn't by chance. She'd suggested a little cafe tucked between bookstores and antique shops, the kind of place where the smell of roasted beans hangs heavy in the air and time feels slower somehow. I arrived early, maybe too early, and spent those extra minutes wondering what I was doing. 25. That number kept echoing in my head like it mattered more than it should. When she walked in, all those doubts momentarily fell silent. She wore a soft sweater, her hair pulled back loosely, strands framing her face in a way that made her look effortless, almost casual. But still, she carried herself with that same quiet confidence. She spotted me instantly, and the small smile that tugged at her lips felt like a private acknowledgement, a recognition that this meeting wasn't just coincidence anymore. We sat by the window, mugs of coffee warming our hands. For a while, the conversation flowed easily about work, books, and the weather turning colder. But I couldn't shake it. The question pressed heavier with every passing minute until finally, I just let it out. Do you ever think about it? I asked quietly. She tilted her head. Think about what? The years between us. My voice felt rougher than I intended. I mean, people notice. People talk. Doesn't it bother you? Her expression softened, but she didn't rush to answer. Instead, she stirred her coffee slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. You're worried about what everyone else thinks. I nodded, ashamed at how true it sounded. I guess so. For the first time since we met, her smile wasn't playful or teasing. It was something else, gentle but firm. Listen, she said, her voice low, steady. I've lived long enough to know people will always have opinions. About everything. About who you should be, what you should do, who you should love. And most of the time, they're wrong. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts didn't vanish so easily. Still, it's not just them. Sometimes it's me. I think about how different our lives have been. What if I'm not what you need? She leaned forward then, closing the space between us. Her hand reached across the table, resting lightly on mine. Her skin was warm, her grip steady, not demanding, just grounding. You're not your age, she said softly. You're your thoughts, your heart, your choices. That's what I see, not the number on your driver's license. The weight of her hand, the calm in her voice, it was like an anchor dropped inside me, steadying the storm I hadn't realized was pulling me under. Still, I couldn't help but whisper, and if I'm not enough? For a moment, her gaze softened even more, a flicker of something vulnerable slipping through her confidence. Then I'd rather risk finding out, she murmured, than go back to being untouched by someone who makes me feel alive. The cafe noise swirled around us, dishes clinking, laughter from another table. But in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people there. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe the years between us weren't walls at all, but just steps on the same path. It was late when we left the cafe that evening. The streets were quieter, the buzz of the city dimmed down to a hum of distant cars and the occasional footstep echoing off old brick walls. She walked beside me, her heels clicking softly against the pavement, and for the first time I noticed how our strides seemed to fall into rhythm without effort. We didn't speak much at first. There was a comfort in the silence, like neither of us felt the need to fill it with noise. The air was crisp, and every breath carried a chill that made me grateful for the closeness between us. Halfway down the block, she slowed, glancing toward a little park tucked between two buildings. The lampposts cast soft pools of yellow light across the path, and she nodded toward a bench. "Sit with me." I followed, and we settled onto the cool wood. For a while, she just stared out the empty swings swaying gently in the night breeze. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "You know, people think confidence comes easy to me." I turned, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Doesn't it?" Her lips curved faintly, but not in amusement. More like in recognition of the assumption. "Not really. I've just had more practice at wearing it. Truth is," she paused, searching the night air as if it might carry the right words to her. "I've been in relationships where I was admired, but not truly seen. Where I was appreciated for what I looked like or the image I gave off, but not for the woman I actually am." The honesty in her voice hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't performing, wasn't trying to impress me. She was handing me something fragile, something real. I swallowed, then admitted, "I know what you mean. People look at me and see my age first, not who I am. They assume I'm naive, that I can't be serious about anything. Sometimes it feels like I'm constantly trying to prove myself, even when I shouldn't have to." Her eyes shifted toward me, and there was a softness there, a recognition that went beyond sympathy. "So you get it," she whispered. We sat there, two different lives, two different ages, but carrying the same kind of loneliness. And in that shared silence, something unspoken clicked between us. Without thinking, I lifted a hand, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen loose across her cheek. She didn't move away. Instead, her eyes closed briefly, as if the simple touch was something she hadn't realized she needed. When she opened them again, she held my gaze steadily. "You see me," she said, almost like a confession, and I realized she was right. I did. Not the polished confidence she showed the world, but the quiet, vulnerable woman sitting beside me under the glow of a street lamp. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Her hand slipped gently onto my knee, light but deliberate. She invited me to a gallery opening one Friday night. I didn't know much about art, but I said yes because it was her, and because I wanted to be wherever she was. The gallery was bright, all glass and white walls, the air humming with polite laughter and clinking glasses. People moved slowly through the space, pausing to admire abstract shapes and splashes of color I couldn't quite make sense of. She belonged there. The way she carried herself, the easy grace with which she greeted acquaintances, the sparkle in her eyes when she discussed a painting. It was like watching her in her element. But as the night went on, I felt the weight of the room pressing in. The glances, subtle but not invisible. A woman whispered something in her friend's ear, her eyes flicking toward us. A man raised his brows when she introduced me, his polite smile just a little too tight. I tried to ignore it, tried to stand tall, to stay focused on her laughter, on the warmth of her hand brushing against mine every so often. But the whispers dug in deeper than I wanted to admit. By the time we stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Are you embarrassed?" The words came out sharper than I intended. She turned, caught off guard. "Embarrassed." "Back there," I said, shoving my hands into my pockets. "The way people looked at us. The way you—" I hesitated, my voice dropping. "The way you didn't really acknowledge me. Not fully." Her brows knit together. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think." My chest felt tight, my voice rough. "I felt like some accessory on your arm. Like maybe you didn't want anyone to know what we are. If we even are anything." For a moment, silence stretched between us. She stood there, framed by the glow of the streetlight, her eyes glistening, not with anger, but with something else. Something that made me feel both guilty and raw. When she spoke, her voice was steady but softer than before. "I wouldn't have let you this close if you didn't already matter to me." I looked away, but she stepped forward, closing the space between us. Her hand found my arm, fingers curling against my sleeve, nails pressing just enough to anchor me. "Do you think I care about their stares?" she whispered. I've lived long enough to know how fleeting people's opinions are. They don't keep me warm at night. They don't make me laugh the way you do. They don't make me feel. Her voice caught, then steadied. Alive the way you do. The city moved around us, cars passing, strangers walking by. But in that moment, it felt like it was just the two of us. Her grip on my arm, her eyes shining in the light, daring me to believe her. And for the first time, I realized the choice wasn't about them. It was about us. Not because we didn't want to, but because we didn't know how. I replayed the night over and over. The whispers, my outburst, the way her eyes had glistened when she swore I mattered. Part of me wanted to call, to apologize, to bridge the silence. Another part of me was afraid she'd change her mind. On the fifth night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found myself walking to her apartment, each step heavier than the last. The city around me was alive, neon signs flickering, voices spilling from restaurants, but I felt numb to it all. My heart pounded harder the closer I got to her street. When I finally stood in front of her door, I hesitated, my hand raised but frozen midair. What if she didn't open it? What if she did? But her expression told me everything I feared. I knocked anyway. A few seconds later, the door opened. She stood there barefoot, hair loosely tied back, a soft cardigan draped around her shoulders. No makeup, no polished mask, just her. For a moment, she looked surprised. Then her expression softened into something unreadable, something that made my chest ache. Neither of us spoke. I should have said something. I'm sorry, or I shouldn't have doubted you. But the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I took one step forward, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. And then she moved. Her arms slipped around my waist, pulling me in gently, but with a certainty that stole the air from my lungs. Her cheek rested against my chest, and for the first time in days, I breathed fully. Her heartbeat was steady, a quiet rhythm against mine, grounding me in a way nothing else had. I held her tightly, my hand resting at the small of her back, my chin brushing the top of her head. We didn't need words. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was healing. Finally, she whispered into the fabric of my shirt. I thought you wouldn't come back. My chest tightened. I didn't know if I should. She leaned back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were tired, a little red at the edges, but clear. Then why are you here? I let out a shaky breath. Because no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, I don't want to let this go. Her hand lifted slowly, brushing against my jaw, her thumb grazing my cheekbone. The touch was soft, almost tentative, but her eyes held mine without wavering. Then don't, she whispered. And in that moment, standing in her doorway with the world outside still rushing by, it felt like the storm had finally broken. We weren't pretending the doubts and fears didn't exist, but we were choosing each other, choosing this fragile, unexpected thing between us. Her forehead rested lightly against mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. We went back to the wine bar where it all started. Not by accident this time, by choice. Walking in with her beside me felt different now. The same amber lights glowed over polished wood tables. The same hum of conversation filled the air, but it all felt warmer, softer, because I wasn't just watching her from across the room anymore. I was with her. We chose a small table tucked into the corner, not separate ones like before. She sat close, her knee brushing mine beneath the table. It wasn't an accident, and I didn't want it to be. The waiter came, and she ordered the same red wine as that first night. I smiled, remembering the exact tilt of her head, the same steady confidence she carried. But this time, there was something new in her expression, a softness in her smile, like she wasn't just letting me into her evening, but into her life. We didn't rush the conversation. We talked about little things, the book she had finished, the places I wanted to travel, the kind of future she sometimes let herself imagine. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just two people talking, laughing, sharing. But underneath it all, there's a quiet certainty, the kind you don't need to name. At one point, I felt her hand slip onto mine. Not hidden, not quick, but openly resting there on the table between us. Her skin was warm, her touch light but deliberate. A statement, not just to me, but to anyone who might glance our way. I looked at her, and she met my gaze with that same smirk I remembered from the first night. Only this time, it wasn't teasing, wasn't daring. It was trusting. "You're staring," she said softly, her voice laced with amusement. "Can you blame me?" I replied. She shook her head gently, her eyes shining in the dim light. "No, not anymore." Later, as the night wound down and the bar emptied little by little, she leaned against me. Her head rested lightly on my shoulder, her hair brushing against my jaw. The weight of her, the warmth of her closeness, was steady and grounding. I let my arms settle around her, holding her in a way that didn't need words. And in that quiet corner, with the soft murmur of the world around us, it struck me. This wasn't temptation anymore. It wasn't just tension or mystery or stolen glances. It felt like home. I thought back to that first night when her gaze had lingered across the room, when she had said those words, "Men my age bore me. But you excite me." I'd had no idea then what it would mean, what it would lead to. Now I did. It meant a connection that didn't fit into neat categories. It meant doubts and whispers we'd still have to face. But it also meant laughter, trust, warmth, and a choice we'd both made. Together, without apology. And we just sat there, breathing in sync, wrapped in the fragile truth we'd both finally let out.